In Ouspensky's book, The Fourth Way, he speaks about 3 lines of work. The first line is work on oneself, self-study and study of the system. The second line of work is in a group with others. And the third line of work is work for the school or the establishment or the organization, the bigger mission, the bigger vision. So in this video, I'm going to be drawing from this quote from Ouspensky in The Fourth Way, page 268. And I'm going to come first from a fourth way perspective, then a Buddhist perspective, because just like the fourth way has work on oneself in a group with others and for the school or organization, Buddhism has exactly the same thing. But in Buddhism, it would be called the Buddha, the Dharma and the Sangha, where the Dharma refers to work on oneself, living the Dharma, the Sangha is the group, and then for the Buddha and Buddhism in general, the enlightenment of all beings would be the third line of work. And the secular scientific example I'm going to bring is Robert Oppenheimer. So Robert Oppenheimer is the individual working on himself. The Manhattan Project is the group. And then, of course, the atomic bomb was the mission. And I hope by sharing those different examples, it really helps you to understand as fully as possible how these 3 lines of work go. So the first line is work on oneself, self-study, study of the system, and trying to change at least the most mechanical manifestations. This is the most important line. And so Ouspensky emphasizes that this is the most important line: study of the system, reading the canonical texts, attending live readings here at book club so we can discuss and you can get the valuable insights from the chat. And also the beginnings of self-observation, the beginnings of observing oneself, one's mechanicalness, and to see oneself in a true objective light, how we really are. And so all of that will come about in the first line of work from a fourth way perspective. Also, some of the other things that Gurdjieff and Ouspensky speak about, avoiding identification, trying to remember oneself, not considering, not expressing negative emotions. All of these aspects of the first line of work come into the fourth way system. Now we move into Buddhism, and in Buddhism, the Dharma, or the teachings and personal practice, is what we would consider the Dharma. It's equivalent to self-study. That's where you'll read the Buddhist texts like the Dhammapada, the words of the Buddha. And the Buddha himself, when underwent many years of rigorous teaching and self-discipline, sitting under the Bodhi tree to enlightenment. And so in Buddhism also, the individual must engage in self-reflection and meditation and breaking mechanical habits like attachment, craving and aversion. And the Buddha's enlightenment represents the highest realization of this first line of work, of which all Buddhists strive for. Everyone is striving for nirvana and enlightenment in Buddhism. This is, the example of the first line of work in Buddhism. And in the example of Oppenheimer, the Manhattan Project, and the atomic bomb, the first line, self-study and growth, Oppenheimer was an intellectual powerhouse. I actually read the biography of him. It's very good, well worth a read. I haven't seen the film yet because the books are better in my opinion. And so he was, like I say, an intellectual powerhouse, a real forward thinker and a visionary. And he immersed himself in subjects like quantum mechanics, philosophy, different languages and theoretical physics. Yeah, he was really developing himself and had several other opportunities and sort of tries at group work and collaborative work before the Manhattan Project came up. And his depth of knowledge and being a leader was what later made him become the figurehead and the leader of the Manhattan Project. The second line is work with other people. One cannot work by oneself. A certain friction, inconvenience and difficulty of working with other people creates the necessary shocks. And so the second line of work, work in a group and with others, one cannot work by oneself. The work, the fourth way, requires a group to confront parts of ourselves. Often what we see in others, the faults and weaknesses that we see in others, are the things that we should be working on ourselves. And working with other people confronts us and forces us to see things that we wouldn't see if we were alone. And monasteries and spiritual communities, ashrams, and spiritual cultures that all live and work together, it creates environments for friction, clashes of ego, people you dislike, you don't like their personality, their character. That also creates friction and opportunities for self-observation. And so the fourth way doesn't require monasteries, but we do need a group, and at the very least a shared framework for accountability. And this is something that's emphasized across both of Ouspensky's books, The Fourth Way and In Search of the Miraculous. It is emphasized a great deal. And of course, we find the same thing in Buddhism. This is called the Sangha, the monastic community and followers of the Buddha. And it represents, again, the second line of work, practicing the teachings with others, discussing your own study of the texts and how you've interpreted certain of the Buddhist frameworks and Buddha's teachings, discussing them with others. And in Buddhism, practicing alone can lead often to delusion and stagnation. It can be quite harsh, the realities that Buddhism shares, and Gurdjieff the same. So it can cause sort of nihilism. What's the point? There's no point in anything. So having a senior person or a group to at least bounce the ideas off, the community can provide correction, accountability, and support if we need it. And even the Buddha didn't stay by himself. He taught and interacted with different disciples, and he dealt with challenges like egos, doubts, and conflicts within the Sangha. And in the Dhammapada, particularly Eknath Eshran's commentary and translation of it, many people would come with intellectual questions to him, wanting to know metaphysics and intellectual insights, and he would never give them. He's saying you have to go away and find it for yourself, and you have to look into it. And so moving on to the scientific and secular aspect, the group within that would be the Manhattan Project. Of course, it's very obvious and clear, isn't it, that Oppenheimer couldn't have built the atomic bomb by himself. Even if he had all of the US government's funds, he couldn't have done it on his own. It required a collective genius group of people. You need the physicists, the engineers, chemists, military strategists, and also people to sustain them, the workers, the cleaners, the cooks. Everyone had to work synergistically in order for the Manhattan Project to progress, to get to the goal. And the sheer difficulty of working in secrecy with all of these different egos and all these different departments, the friction and collaboration created something greater than any one person, even a great mind like Oppenheimer, could have achieved by themselves. The third line is work for the school, for the organization. This last line takes on different aspects for different people. So the third line of work is work for the school or the organization. It sort of correlates to concepts like higher purpose, giving back and extending the work beyond oneself, not just keeping all of the information and knowledge that you have. Ouspensky says that this looks different. Different people have different strengths, different characteristics. And so in an organization, a school, each person, this third line will take a different, it will look differently for each people. So some examples, teaching others, creating resources, maintaining the structure that allows others to find the path. And for some, it might mean spreading knowledge, and for others, it might be sort of silent service or working in the background, helping the organization to push it forward. Here at Book Club, in a sense, the book club is my third line of work, if you like, because I am now talking about these things, sharing these ideas, reading the canonical texts, and I've even, done my own work and writing that is available now. And so each of us has to look into our own third line of work. What does it look like for us? And this is perhaps the most difficult aspect, but we can learn again from the insights of Buddhism and from scientific materialism. So in Buddhism, the third line would be work for the school and the greater purpose. It would be the Buddha and the larger Buddhist mission. So the Buddha was not just a teacher to his immediate disciples, to those that lived and were with him. His larger mission was to preserving and spreading the Dharma for future generations, which is why Buddhism is still alive and thriving today. And it's also why monks transcribed the Pali Canon, and why Buddhist traditions flourished in different cultures, and why it still exists today, because in Buddhism, the third line is going strong, and it's not just self-development, but it's group learning and ensuring the continuity of the system. And of course, this is why we've all heard of Buddhism. Perhaps we've read the Dhammapada. We will definitely be able to recall an image of the Buddha, and that's because the third line of work in Buddhism is strong. And maybe coming with a few negative connotations, the scientific materialist and secular example of Oppenheimer, the Manhattan Project, and the atomic bomb. And this is something to consider, that perhaps the third line of work may have negative consequences down the line. And so the third line in this aspect was the creation of the atomic bomb and its impact on history. Of course, likely the people of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they wouldn't have been very pleased, let's say, with the creation of the atomic bomb, because it decimated these cities in Japan. And it wasn't just a scientific challenge, it was part of a global shift in power and warfare, and it ushered in this new capacity for destruction. And obviously Oppenheimer's very famous quote from the Bhagavad Gita when he saw the bomb, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds," is sort of a cultural phrase that he's uttered after the destruction. And also in the biography, as they were approaching completion of the mission, he was trying to maybe rein it in and focusing on the moralist questions about this. And this is where it becomes deeply ethical, the third line, because what does it mean? Obviously, it's very clear for the Manhattan Project, but there is a great documentary. It's called Wild Wild Country. It's about Osho's mission. And if you watch that, in the beginning, everything's lovely, but often things can turn. They can turn dark. And I've mentioned before, I'm very interested in cult figures and cult leaders, Jim Jones and also David Koresh. In the beginning, it looks lovely. It looks like a beautiful, peaceful, harmonious community. But if you know anything about the ends of these communities, this third line of work, you know that it can often become, and as Gurdjieff and Ouspensky would say regarding octaves, it can take a different path and become an inversion of what it was meant to be. And so now the question, where are you in these three lines of work? Have you ever observed these other lines of work? Of course, the first line of work is very obvious, because that's the one primary line of work that many people, that's where they stop. They begin and they finish with the first line of work. And so where are you in these three lines? Are you stuck in self-work without a community, without friction of others? But maybe you have a small group of people working together, but you lack a higher mission. And Ouspensky and Gurdjieff taught that true awakening, it requires all of them, the three lines of work, of course, which is why it's such a fundamental part of the teaching. And so with these examples that I've shared, the Buddha had his Dharma, the Sangha, and the greater mission of Buddhism. Oppenheimer had his own genius and his character, personality, and leadership, his team, the Manhattan Project, and of course the creation of the atomic bomb. And what about you? Where are you? Let me know in the comments where you are, what you need, and what you'd like to find. And this is why I've written my book, Awakening the Machine, to focus again on these principles, to maybe share in plainer language than you might find it in The Fourth Way or In Search of the Miraculous. And this video, if it resonated with you, I highly recommend you go and get yourself a copy of Awakening the Machine. The link's in the description. But more than that, focus on your own life. look at your life, how you're spending it, how you're spending your time, and where you need to focus regarding these 3 lines of work. Let me know in the comments. Take care, and I'll see you soon.